Hi, I'm Ömür. I'm sharing my design process and my ideas. Render Weekly shares different props and asks you to create product visuals based on them, and their current prop is clock. This is not a design in the complete sense, but rather it's like a visualization. But it includes the ideation process, and I wanted to show that. Here you can see some ideas and past entries to this challenge and the past prompts. Before I started ideation process, I already had two concepts in my mind. The first one is about randomness and ambiguity. I'll start by sketching some rough circular shapes. These lines might look random, but they actually represent the object I have in my mind. They are like pipes or cables. When we think of a clock, we always picture something round, and I wanted to use that image, that sense of familiarity. So let's draw the three-dimensional detail, like a close-up detail. Here, the pipes twist and overlap each other randomly. Somewhere among these pipes, there is a hidden light that moves around the object. It rotates like the hands of a conventional clock, and the reflections and gloss it creates actually tells us time. The core idea was to tell the time through the constantly shifting chaos of the pipes. No moment is exactly like the one before. I like this idea of randomness and dynamism in an everyday object. It twists your expectations and tries to give you something more. And I didn't think of any specific materials, but in my mind, it was glossy metal. Like chaotic pipes of metal hanging on your wall showing you the time. I like the idea of ambiguity and chaos in a clock because at its core, a clock is all about clarity and repetition. What drew me to the idea of ambiguity and chaos in clocks was a design I saw. It reminded me of the often overlooked nature of what a clock really is. I guess I was also drawn to the idea of leisure and free time as well, and system we live in and how it relates to that. The clock was something like this, a very ordinary shaped object with glossy or semi-transparent glass in front. Honestly, it doesn't blur much, but it reminded me of the concept and it really stuck with me. I like the idea of having you know, a rough sense of the time without knowing exactly what it is. Maybe it gives me, a kind of freedom. And some specific times of the day just bum me out. And I want to see that ambiguity is a feature of the object. And I think its randomness is a step toward that. By the way, sorry for the 10-second blurry image here. My recording device betrayed me. The second idea that came to me before I started is based on the mental image of a clock. The picture that pops into your mind when you think of a clock. And I wondered if I could express this directly. It sounds simple, but what I mean isn't just representing the idea of a clock, the circle and the lines, but thinking about the actual lines I'm drawing on paper, projecting the imperfections and mistakes I make onto the object itself, and maybe working with the stereotypical clock that comes to mind. We think of it as something round with rotation. And of course, this easily recognizable shape, it can be a design criterion or something to consider along the way. But for example, could a clock be like a puzzle? No. After all, the goal is the goal is still to show the time. So it should have some kind of mechanism, and I'm not sure exactly how. The original mechanism is simple. It just rotates. What I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to draw here is introducing non-linearity into the clock. And let these shapes correspond to different densities of the day. What do I mean by densities? Think of it as a smooth line. At 3 o'clock, you're in the flow, you are doing your thing. At 5 or 6 o'clock, excitement increases and the density rises. Maybe because you're heading home. And as the density increases, it becomes a little bit more chaotic. On one hand, this makes me question something. What do you call it? A clock has cyclicality, a rotation. Every day, it seems to pass the same way. Physically, that's not true, but from the way we experience it, it is. So I thought maybe we could explore linearity as an alternative. It can be rotational, and that's fine, but it should be linear in some way as well. These elements will turn around the axis, so yes, there is rotation. As they turn, this band will turn too. There should be times, numbers on the tape, and maybe a gradient of colors to represent the day. Actually, this could work. Let's call it the band clock, focused on linearity and gradients. I figured the color might correspond to the time. Let's not try to show it directly, and let me try to introduce ambiguity. Maybe it could look something like this. Does it really have to be this way? I don't know. Maybe it worked better in this form, standing on the wall. Actually, let me just draw a simple circle. Do I even need a band? There is a cylinder with a gradient of colors on it. I'm not painting the colors right now. One spot on the cylinder shows the time, the side facing you. As it rotates, the color changes. What you see keeps shifting slowly, and from that marked spot, you can tell the time. Of course, this is something that will sit on a table rather than hang on the wall. It could be a table clock as well. I don't think there are any strict rules for this challenge. We moved away from the conventional clock. I thought maybe it could be electronic or something. One point on the cylinder will be open, like a semi-transparent acrylic, similar to the blurry clock I showed at the start. At that open spot, the clock is clearly visible. And honestly, it's not a great idea, not very original, and I'm not that fond of it. We are drifting away from the idea of ambiguity, and I want to stick with it. Do you remember those clocks? Maybe they are still made. I think it was a cuckoo clock with a little bird or something. I'm not really sure what the pendulum was for. It was probably part of the mechanism, it swings. And maybe there is something interesting in the idea of the pendulum. Single pendulum swinging back and forth on the wall, and there is mechanism. Normally it will rotate around this axis, but let it swing around that one instead. I don't really know what this will accomplish. I don't think the idea has a concrete function. I can't come up with one. For now, all I'm focused on is the swinging motion itself. Let's go in a completely different direction. Can we focus on the object's physicality, its geometry? I was looking at other entries for this challenge, and most of them kept it minimal. I'm thinking, can I try something a bit different? Imagine a system where at 1 o'clock it bulges here, and 2 o'clock it bulges somewhere else, something like that. Normally it's flat. Let's imagine a system like this. I'm showing it from the side. There is the clock mechanism with something at the end and a fabric-like surface. The end part pushes the fabric, and the shadow appears where it makes contact, and from that shadow you can tell the time. Actually, I find the idea of shadows interesting. Shadows are one of the ways we track the passage of time during a day. Think of a sundial. There is a spot where the shadow falls. I don't remember the details exactly, but the idea of shadows, reminded me of it. Maybe shadows could be used in other ways too. For example, imagine a light source. I'm showing it from the side, and there's metal, an opaque surface, and the light spreads out everywhere. But if you place a block at one spot, I think this will happen. The clock shows 1 o'clock, and the shadow appears there, and as it keeps rotating, you can read the time from the light, the shadow will rotate as well. The negative side of this idea is that it's hard to see during the day, but maybe that's part of the point. If you really want to know the time, you have to make an effort to see it. It's unclear. And at night, it becomes clear, a fully visible object. You're in the flow during the day, and checking the clock all the time could be disruptive. I don't think this is a bad idea. Let's call it the shadow clock too. Maybe there is a way to make the time easier to see during the day too. I don't know. I also had another thought. Imagine an object blocking the light. Like this. Behind it, there's a shadow, and we could put text there. We could project it. I'm not sure about how, though. Or here's a different idea. Imagine something dark. Say it's 6 o'clock. We put a light source at the 6 o'clock spot. I sketched it really roughly. It could be a black cover, some kind of black fabric with a light underneath. As it rotates, the light moves to different positions. Or how about something like this? It's rotational again. Think of it as a three-dimensional drawing. It's kind of like a folding fan, actually. As the day goes by, it shows us how much the day has passed. It slowly opens up. And it's not saying it's 1 o'clock or anything like that. It tells you roughly how much of the day is gone and how much is left. How could we make this? It rotates twice during the day. Even if it were divided into 24 segments like a folding fan, I think it would be hard to tell the exact time. But thinking of the day as a whole and showing how much of it's left isn't a bad idea, I think. It lets you see it from a different perspective. Picture 24 of these elements. The first 12 will fill the first 12 hours. When the next 12 hours start, the last of the first 12 or the one at the beginning disappears and another one starts rotating. And you can also see a color change. For example, it turns dark blue as night falls with a hint of yellow showing through. I'll call this one the time remaining clock. Maybe the light clock idea could be approached differently. What I mean is we could cut the flow of light here, creating a dark area. But if the dark spreads further, it could highlight ambiguity, that sense of uncertainty. The surface we see is just a circle, semi-transparent, but there are layers behind it. Perhaps the layers are closer in some areas, blocking more light, and that's how you read the time. And it could be made of paper, glued together, or fastened in some way. Physically, this object could be simple, but I think making it look nice will be tough. I mean, it could easily look a little bit rugged, I believe. So, to be honest, this idea didn't really bring anything substantial to my mind. Moving on to the Miu Miu store by Herzog de Meuron. There is a detail on its metal facade. I'm sketching a section, and I don't know the exact detail. Anyway, here's a wall, and it's connected somehow, but that's not important. From the outside, you only see the metal. And this section isn't reflective, but the middle part is. And how did they achieve this? They polished the metal only at a certain height. I thought the clock could be something like that, like a mirror, but not covering the whole object. Just one spot of steel is polished. I drew it badly here, but in reality, that'd be like a smooth transition from blurry steel to clear mirror. And it rotates, just like a regular clock, and it only reflects where the polished part is, which moves with the time. I find this idea really interesting. It's like turning the material itself into a clock with a simple twist, using its reflection. The clarity of the reflection becomes the clock. It reflects the room depending on where you're looking from, and the reflection changes with your view and the time, while the rest of the material, rest of the object stays blurry. I think it works. I'm not sure yet how I'll model it or, how I'll handle the material for rendering, but I can give it a try. It's a bit minimal, but I think that's fine. And, also since the reflection keeps changing, it's like, reading the time from the shifts in the reflection itself. And I really like that idea. And maybe we should revisit this idea. It could work like this. It opens at first, then starts closing on its side. During the early part of the day, it's full, and as the day winds down, it empties. I mean, it's not a bad idea. We ended up handling it in a simpler way. Maybe there don't even need to be layers. It could just be like a real folding fan. Let me show you. Here are two pieces. How do we show this? Is there fabric in between? The more it turns, the more the fabric is visible. Does it wrap around like this? I don't think that would work. For the fabric to do that, it has to be held by something. I mean, it's not perfect, but you get the idea. On one hand, I found myself thinking again about ambiguity. I watched a video of Okisato recently. He talked about how he does the same things every day, following the same routine. By doing that, he starts to notice small changes in his life, in his surroundings. And the clock is similar in that way. It repeats the same motion over and over and always returns to the same state. Then I thought maybe the clock could avoid returning to exactly the same state, always be a little different, while still keeping its cyclical nature. After all, that's what time is like. I wanted to highlight that. We pass 12 o'clock every day, but we are never the same person. Something similar could happen here. Idea I had was something like this. Lots of balloons, loosely standing. It could be something else, but for now I thought of balloons. And one balloon is connected to an invisible mechanism, and as it rotates, that balloon shows the time, and others move and change positions along with it. Balloons are elastic, so I imagined them constantly shifting into different shapes. If there are gaps, one might move, something might fall, and they are always taking on a slightly different form. The point is, yes, there is repetition, but there is always change too. And most of the time, it's small, subtle changes, but occasionally it might change dramatically as well. I think this is an interesting idea, definitely not bad. I'm going to note it down. Balloons, it doesn't have to be balloons. I mean, the important thing is that it shows change and routine. Modeling and rendering it like this might be tricky, but I think I can do it. I'm not sure, but I think we might need a physics simulation. What I'm questioning is whether it has to be balloons. Balloons are nice because they're elastic and they can float, but they deflate. Maybe soft balls would work better. They can still expand or shrink, giving a different kind of interaction. But for visualization purposes, I can overlook the physics a bit. It could even be like a ping pong ball or something a bit more rigid. It doesn't have to be a balloon. It will move eventually. Or maybe it could be something like this, a different system. Picture a container. As long as there is a block inside and the container rotates from its center point, the balls inside will keep moving in a clockwise motion. This area acts as a spot where the movement is stopped. That area indicates the time. This iteration is simpler and more practical. I'll draw it in 3D, not the holding, just the details of this area. Inside, there are balls with gaps between them. They can move freely, but they are limited by the other balls. As it rotates, the balls are always in motion. The clock tells the time, but it also reflects the ever-changing nature of things. It's like saying, yes, it's the same time of the day, 4 o'clock yesterday, 4 o'clock now, but each 4 o'clock is different. The exact arrangement can change. Maybe something like this, it could even show the exact time. The balls are outside this area, and I want to keep the focus on them. I don't think I'll show anything else, other than balls. The front and the container are either, they're acrylic or glass, or maybe semi-glossy, but I'm not sure about the rest. Maybe the time could be displayed on the back side, but I don't have a concrete idea or, like a concrete decision yet. Another angle could be that since this will just be a render, I might focus more on the digital side. Maybe I could use the advantages of technology. We've only really talked about analog so far. When I think digital, I'm not sure if I mean digital or electronic, by the way. The first thing that comes to mind is a LED display that changes. Something like this. A box with text on it acting as a clock. For example, it shows 15 o'clock, then 15:01. That's a way to approach it. It's the first image you think of with a digital clock. And, it makes sense to use the digital display technology this way. But maybe we could make it playful. With digital, you can do anything. Anything is possible. I'm wondering if we could mix it with a traditional clock. There is a circle with a rotating gradient. But you don't need both digital and analog for this. Analog alone, it works. How could we take advantage of LEDs? Maybe we could create a really cool effect, that got me thinking about coolness. The gradient idea with analog, it would normally just be a gradient of color and that's all. Imagine a line showing the color of the day with the colors gradually fading from it. On the other side of the clock, there is a sensor that picks up the color of the wall, and as the wall color changes, it's reflected on the rest of the clock, and also that gradient line, it rotates. It's like a color gradient that fades towards the wall. A sensor constantly senses the wall color and reacts to it. And sure, there might be a shadow between the clock and the wall, so it won't be perfectly seamless. But maybe it could reflect everything around it, not just the wall. I was thinking text could be projected onto a transparent display, but I'm not sure if projecting colors like that is even possible. There are some concepts, but I don't think they are practical yet. The thing with digital is, I don't usually think about it, so I feel a bit lost. The analog idea I had before could be done much more easily in digital, like running a constant physics simulation, but that's not really what I want. Since I'm not used to digital, it feels a bit overwhelming. So what do I do now? I'll check out Behance and see what others have done. And it's like a whole different world. And honestly, it feels like my brain has stopped. People have done things like this. Gradients flying and merging and other effects I can't even describe. The possibilities are endless, and since you are not dealing with real materials, you are creating from nothing. And I decided to step back a little from digital. It reminds me too much of smartphones where anything feels possible without limits, and it doesn't really spark anything for me. I think it's more logical to move on to the things I care about. I started wondering if I could do something with mirrors. Imagine lots of mirrors, each showing the same time. 12 here, 12 there, but why do it this way? I thought about it for a while, and another idea came to me. It's a bit like a sundial, but seen from a different angle. When you wake up in the morning, it's morning, even if you don't know the exact time. And at noon, it's midday. You don't mix up midnight and daytime. With a sundial, something like this happens at sunset. I don't remember the exact mechanism, but basically, you read the time from where the shadow falls. And I wanted to explore the idea of shadows and how they interact with the materials some more. So let's say there is a stone plate with a surface like this. I drew a little too much, so let me show it as a section. For example, imagine this is the clock and you are looking at it from here. Let's say there is a light and it interacts with shadows somehow. How will that work? There should be something like this on the clock, and shine the line from this angle and the shadows stretch, and from the front, if you shine the light from the front, the shadows get flattened. And honestly, this isn't exactly the form I wanted. It feels a bit crude. I'm not really sure what shape it should have. The idea was to read the time through the intensity of the shadows, the darkness on the object. But why this idea? I want it to be a wall object, like a sculpture, where you can't quite tell what it is, whose shadows quietly tell you the time without being obvious. I don't really like its current form. We've been working with ambiguity, and now I want to explore a bit more through the construction. I like it. I like the idea of the construction. For example, clocks have minutes, hours, seconds, but why do we always see them packed together? What if we let them be separate? Let different speeds happen in different places. We can link this idea of non-compactness to another feature. The clocks are always something you look at, but what if they are something you can play with? And let it be three-sided and maybe even amorphous. And one side shows the hour, and if you want to know exact minutes, you have to rotate it, and so you are constantly interacting with it to read the time. And sometimes you leave it on its sides, in its minutes side, and when you want to know the time, you have to touch it and turn it. It's a clock that makes you engage with it. Or maybe it's always changing what it shows, like it's constantly in motion, rotating, shifting, and imagining it like an enclosure, and inside there is this sphere just turning, always facing away from you. I'm not exactly sure how to build this yet, but I can show it easily in the render. I mean, it's kind of closer to the compactness idea, the concept of compactness. It's not like they're very different, but still there's something about it. It kind of invites you to reach out and touch it. There is no particular reason for the amorphous form. I just thought it would feel better to touch, more interesting, maybe even soft. That's why I drew it like that, like a pillow perhaps, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it has thorns, something that makes touching it uncomfortable. There is a kind of relationship there, one that's built around touching. So the idea becomes something contrary if it has thorns. Looking at time shouldn't be comfortable, it should disturb you a little. You should really have to want to look at it. Another idea that came to me is based on a mirror. I'm not exactly sure how the mechanism will work, but it's an idea. So imagine this. Here is the surface of the mirror, and there are our hands. And when I look at it from the outside, what do I see? The hands and their reflections. The reflection shows the inside of our hands. The idea is time could actually be written on the inner surface of those hands, only visible through the reflection. It's kind of interesting. When you look at it straight on, you see nothing. But usually we don't face clocks directly anyway. They are on the wall off to the side, a little diagonal from where we sit. The essence of the idea is this. You can only see the exact time from the sides. It's like a game. But why did this even come to my mind? I guess I just saw a mirror and wondered what could I make with it. But honestly, right now it doesn't mean that much to me. I think this idea has the potential to turn into something really good. But let's move on to something else. I thought maybe I could do something with the idea of completion. What do I mean by that? I thought about it before, but never really explored it. It didn't spark much at the time. For example, imagine this element rotating. And when it reaches a certain point, it completes itself. That's when you can clearly see the number, the time. But is that possible? Whatever time it shows in that moment should appear whole, while everything else stays fragmented. Does this even make sense? I'm thinking it might actually work. You do something like this. Here's the line that completes the number 1, and here's the line that completes the number 2. And 60 minutes later, the lines align. And there will be a line completing every number on the clock. At first, it might look meaningless, but when the numbers align, if the lines align, the numbers appear. Maybe this clock is just 2 pieces, but I doubt that will feel broken. Actually, I imagined it even more fragmented. Think of lots of pieces, and the ones I marked are constantly rotating and continuously completing each other over and over. Let's evaluate this. I think the idea isn't bad. What's happening here is that some lines are really close together and the rest feels empty. Maybe that space could be filled somehow. I don't know yet. I need to think about it. This will take some trial and error. It needs prototyping. And I haven't gotten much further than this. And maybe I'm just a little tired right now for this. Here's another idea I had. Something based on optics and zooming. You make something really small. Maybe it's something you stick to the wall. On it there are numbers. So not like the ones I just draw. From the side, it looks like this. And there is a magnifying glass. From afar, you can't see the numbers at all because they are so tiny. But when it lines up with the lens, and then you can actually see what time it is. The lens reveals the number. Everything is hidden inside this tiny object. And it's as if the lens is pulling the numbers out and showing them to you. Right now I'm moving on without a set theme. I'm just looking at examples, exploring. For example, I'm checking out Philip Stark right now. But I guess I'll end up choosing one of these ideas. Most of them, I think, have the potential to be developed further. This is a concept I like, for example, but I'm not going to go with it. My mind is still on the idea with the balls. You could think of this as a concept study, the idea of wanting to touch time. It's not a bad one. But I'm mostly doing this to just get a render. So I'm moving through these ideas pretty quickly. I think this one isn't bad at all. It feels like it could be developed in a lot of different ways. I think I really like the ideas on this page. But the idea with the balls resonated deeply with me right now. I can't really say it's better than the others. The idea of something ever changing, I like that. Maybe it could be done in some other way as well, but I don't know yet. I need to think about it. And maybe take a break and come back before moving on to the next step. Right now it's more like an exercise, kind of a challenge, and I'm being a little bit unserious. But honestly, I think that's better, making it fun and playful. Being too serious, I feel like it can get kind of boring. The problem I'm anticipating with that idea is that the render might not turn out that great, but I'm going to think about it a bit more and maybe I'll notice something else. Now that I think about it, I think I can make it work well after all. I'll make a video and it will rotate slowly, the balls will move. I think it's going to take some time to figure it out. This idea has been popping into my mind for the last 2 weeks, but I haven't done anything with it yet. Maybe I'll get to it later. That shape isn't bad either, but I think I'm going to go with the ball idea. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll do the rendering and modeling in the next video.